Hi guys, today we're going to be painting a Blood Angels jump back Intercessor. So while this guy spins around, why don't you drop a like and a subscribe. See the next ones. Okay, I'm going to start with the Zenithal Prime, as you can see here, and then I'm going to give it an undercoat in the shadows with the airbrush of Leviathan Purple. I just want to add some richness to the layers that we'll be adding later. You can do this with a normal brush, just make sure you keep to the undersides of all these panels. And the reason we do the Zenithal first is because the white will give a nice bright pop to the yellow that we're putting on here as well, because this is going to give a lovely bit of shade to the armor that we're going over the top with. And you can see there, just doing a few. I'm actually sort of getting a whole unit done. And then obviously Blood Angels red, just testing it on the glove there. And then we're going to build this up in sort of stages, so we don't want to go one big heavy coat with the airbrush, because we want to keep those tones from the undercoating alive as we're covering it up. So I go fairly light in the shadows, because I want a lot of that shadow color to come through, and I want to do just enough so that the top parts don't read as yellow. We want it to be a nice bright red, almost orange. That really gives some shape to this armor. Okay, so I'm using some titanium white ink. I'm just picking out some of these tiny details on his arms, because later we'll come with some contrast paint, and it just brings these little details to life. We don't want to have too much attention on them, but it's nice to have them there. It just gives those models a little extra level of interest. I'm also covering this little pot, jar, ammo tanker on his flamer pistol, because we'll paint that yellow later, and we want it to be nice and bright, and it's going to be difficult to do that painting over all this super rich red. And just make sure I get into all the nooks and crannies. And the other thing I'm being careful of here is I just don't want to get anything on the armor, because fixing it later will be difficult with all those subtle tones. So here, Avalon Sunset. It's got an orangey feel to this yellow. It's not too desaturated, but it's still got a lovely bright color. So it ties in well with all this red. So we'll go in there onto that little flavor tank. Now I'm also going to use that Avalon Sunset for his helmet. I'm actually going to give him an unhelmeted head. However, I do feel like, being as he is a jump pack intercessor, he's going to need that helmet eventually. So he may just be taking it off for clarity at one point, but he's going to keep it with him. And I do like this pack because it comes with one that specifically is designed to portray that. So just giving the whole helmet a nice coat of Avalon Sunset. Now, Black Legion contrast paint, and I'm going in over the Aquila on the chest. I'm also going to be doing his under armor area. But with the reason I'm using the contrast paint is because it flows very nicely. As long as you keep your brush fairly wet and water down your paints just a tiny bit, you get a nice flow, really good control into these difficult to reach areas. The Aquila being one of them, but the most difficult parts are the under armor areas in between the joints of the panels of armor. Now I'm also going to do this shoulder portrait, and again, being very, very careful not to go any further than I need to, because fixing the colours in this armor, as I say, are going to be quite difficult. But this contrast paint also lets some of those undertones come through, so you will get some shading even in that black area where it's darker underneath and a little brighter on top, as long as you apply this coat carefully and don't just slap on a big thick layer of paint. And you see there, getting into the unmentionables and the hard to reach areas, and just being careful not to get in the armor, because it's going to be difficult to fix, and when it's got such a nice effect, we don't want to ruin that. Also getting onto the weapon, again being careful of what we've already painted, because fixing that yellow after you get black on it, that's going to be a real nightmare. And then I came back. I was originally going to do all the leather areas in a dark brown, but I thought, you know what, we'll keep it simple, fairly straightforward. And I went with the same Black Legion contrast paint onto his holster and his belt and any of the little pouches he might have on his body. And then using Vallejo Black, I'm just going to freehand a little teardrop, or blood drop, I suppose, blood angels, aren't they? Blood drop in black onto this chest plate. It's always nice to try your hand at a little bit of freehanding, and these nice simple symbols are a good place to start. You can always sketch these in pencil first, but you know, I was feeling risky this day, on this day. And there we go, just a little blood drop, and that can be refined once it's dry, just to make sure that you get all your edges lovely and neat. Vallejo dark aluminium for all the metal on this one. So he's got these little grenades on his hip, and then there's the ports on his boot thrusters or stabilizers, I suppose they are, and some of the areas, some of these exhaust ports on his jump pack as well. And I do like this dark aluminium, flows really nicely into the recesses without clogging things up too much, but it doesn't get away from you too quickly either. It's not too watery. It's a really good consistency on this one. And then just some tiny details in his fist here where it's articulated, and for these little knuckle dusters that he has. And then Caliban green for this more rudimentary looking grenade that he has on his hip as well. And I'll come back and pick out the little details on top with dark aluminium once this is dry. Don't be afraid to move your models around as well, you know, just as long as you're not touching wet paint. You want to make sure you get into as many sizes as you can, paint as much as you can see, and don't miss anything out. And titanium white ink now, I'm going to go in for the eyes on the helmets. And my little toothpick tree that I use for all my heads and when I'm doing units. And then just being very careful to just keep it right within that lens space on the helmet. And I'm using pale flesh for the actual unhelmeted head, but I'm putting it on fairly thinly because I want that zenithal to show through a little, especially around the underneath of the cheeks, because I want this this squadron leader to look a bit more washed out and ill, a bit drained. And Warpstone glow for the lenses on the helmet. Again, just being careful to keep on top of the white, and then the Warpstone glow on top of the white will give it a nice bright pop. So those lenses will, even though it's green and yellow, they'll still stand out because it's that much brighter. And that's why we use the Avalon Sunset as well. Lovely yellow, nice bright colour, but that little touch of red to it, that little orangey feel, just gives it a bit of contrast with those lenses and the armour. And then Retributor armour, lovely rich gold, just for some of these details. Little skull on the back of his power fist. And I'm also going to do the little heat grating on his flamer pistol with this as well. Again, just moving the model around, make sure I get all the different angles so the whole thing is nice and covered without getting onto the armor itself. And now, as you can see, oh, I forgot I did this. So I'm actually freehanding a blood drop in gold onto his shoulder pad because I'm not a big fan of some of these transfers. I feel like I love decals. They add amazing detail in such a short amount of time, but some of them, just a plain yellow blood drop, doesn't really feel like it cuts it for the leader of a squadron. So what I did here was I actually freehanded a golden blood drop onto his shoulder, and then I went back with some corn red and mephiston red and just did a tiny blood drop within the blood drop just to break up that one flat shape. And there I am on the flamer pistol, as I said. Just be careful not to get any into the little holes, so we get that good contrast, so it really feels like a little metal grate over the top of it rather than just one solid lump of gold on top of it. Back with the dark aluminium, just picking out some of the little areas on this weapon, because just that one coat of black I felt like it was a bit flat, so some of the mechanical areas near the handle, just breaking up a little, and also for the little area where the igniter would be on this flamer. And then as I said earlier, back for those tiny details on top of the grenade. And some of these details, it's a great idea to do them. They don't take a great deal of effort, but when people notice them, it really makes a difference. Now, Rykon Flesh Shade, I'm going to give this extremely pale flesh a very watered down wash of Rykon Flesh Shade. I'm going to concentrate on trying to build it up under the cheeks and in the eyes, so he has that sort of sunken vampiric look to his face. And then very, very watered down, I'm adding a little magenta, so it's almost like his skin's very, very thin. Not the healthiest. I'm going to let that sit, and once all that's dry, I can then pick out the details in his microphone and his headpiece by coming back with those colours and tidying up that wash. But that little wash really adds a difference, a lot of contrast into that very pale face. Then back with the pale flesh again, just on the higher up details at the top of the cheekbones, the forehead, the bridge of the nose, very gently, and it just brings the face to life, but he still has that sunken, exhausted feeling. Now, titanium white ink, and we're going to be doing my favourite jump pack effect. There'll be a link to my video on how to do this very quickly up in the corner. But first, it's titanium white ink inside, then we give the quick wipe through with Magma Droth Flame, just trying to cover us all that white. It doesn't matter if you cover a little bit outside of where you've painted white as well, because the Magma Droth Flame being a contrast paint will add a little bit of depth of colour, and we're looking for that bright centre like the boosters are burning. Flash Git's yellow is slightly brighter than Avalon's Onset. It really sets it apart from the helmet, as you can see there, just in the centre. So we're covering about 50 to 60% of where we did orange. And then titanium white ink just in the very, very centre, very, very carefully. And that way, it's just have that lovely booster effect. Now, I wasn't happy with the gold on here, so what I did was I actually went back and just neatened it up with this super fine marker that I actually use for inking comic books. And it just really made that symbol on his shoulder stand out a bit more. Okay, Nuln Oil, lovely Nuln Oil. Fairly watered down. We're just washing the metallic parts that we do have. There's not many on this model, but it just gives it a little bit of life, a little bit of depth. It gives it a kind of grimier feel, like the metal's actually in use. But just not being too heavy with it. Now, Frost Heart Blue, a little watered down, and we're going on to those details on his wrist. And I say when this dries, anything inside that little, the recess parts will be a fairly dark blue, and anything on top of the buttons will be a nice bright blue. So really, really good effect. Then Vallejo Black, I'm just doing the edges of his shoulder pads here, his pauldrons. Very, very stressful part, because any mistakes here are going to cost dearly. So just got that nice contrasting effect from one shoulder pauldrons really like they're inverted. And then Secret Sauce, bit of Necron compound on a dry brush, and we're scraping away all the areas that are going to have had the most wear or damage, anywhere that's going to come into contact with or lots of heat. So it just adds a little texture to his armor, so it doesn't just like one flat color. But we don't want it to look dirty. So what I've done here is I've actually sprayed him with a coat of matte varnish. But as I say, it doesn't matter how matte the varnish says it is. it's always going to leave a slight shine. So this is not too bad. And then I'm going with some black panel liner from Tamiya. I'm just getting some of these details. And what I don't want in this, I've done it on other models where I don't varnish it first, and it gives it a good bleed into the paint itself. But when you varnish it, it tends to stay a little tighter and be a little cleaner. It's also much easier to clean up. So what I'm doing is here, I'm adding it to all these recesses. I get a good bit of working time, and then what I'll do is I'll come back with a paper towel or a cotton bud and just quickly wipe away any excess so it's not too heavy an effect. Now do the whole base in Mechanica Standard Grey. And I do water it down quite a bit actually. That's why I use one of these little metal pots. And it just helps me to get it around the base a little faster, but also make sure that I get into all the little nooks and crannies on this piece of cork that I'm using for the base. There we go. And now decals. I'll stick a link to my video on applying decals, but I'm only using the Blood Angel's wings in this yellow colour to pop against that black black shoulder pad. As you can see, these are fairly old, so it took quite a bit of saturating to get it off there, but once I did, definitely worth doing. Now I'm dry brushing the base in Administratum Grey just to give some volume and feel to the texture on this cork base. Nice and alive. And then Dirty Down Rust, good old shake onto these little metal rebar areas, just for a little bit of interest on the base. And I do like to leave the edges of the cork sometimes. I feel like it adds a bit of character to that. It's almost like it's, you know, like alien Earth. I'm not sure what it is. And there he is. Smash the ever living shit out of the like and subscribe buttons if you've enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.